just a couple of logistical things. And then also turn the captioning on when you get a chance. Yes, I see it. Great. And here we go. So welcome to Supporting the Whole Person with Student Basic Needs Services, brought to you by the ACRL University Library Section's Professional Development Committee. I am Sam Harlow. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am co-chair of the committee. I will be moderating this program along with my colleague, Andrea Wright, whose pronouns are she, her, hers, my fellow committee member. This is one of an ongoing series of online programs sponsored by our committee. There is a LibGuide, of course, with our programming that I am dropping in the chat if you want to see our upcoming program as well as past programming that we have done. So before I introduce our presenters, I want to cover a few logistics. This session is being recorded, and when the recording is ready, we will send the link of the video, slides, and any other supplemental documentation to everyone who registered for the program. The program will run for an hour total, including time for questions. Please feel free to add questions into the chat box throughout the presentation at any time. The presenters will be using progressive stacking to answer questions in the chat. The progressive stack is a technique used to give marginalized groups a greater chance to speak. It is sometimes an introduction to or stepping stone to consensus decision-making, in which simple majorities have less power. The technique works by allowing people to speak on the basis of race, with preference given to members of groups that are considered the most marginalized. If you're BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, please use an asterisk, a star, the asterisk, before the question in the chat box. Andrea will be collating them and will be prepared to read them to our panelists, who I will introduce in a moment at the appropriate times. As you use the chat feature, please make sure you send your message to all panelists and attendees. It defaults to all panelists, so please switch it to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you're asking. We will post a link to a program assessment in the chat box after the question and answer session. So please take a few moments to give us your feedback on today's session. So with those announcements out of the way, I am very happy to start today's program. So again, just a quick reminder about chat. Please use the all participants and attendees panel. So our panelists are Lana Wood, who uses pronouns she, they, is the Health Science and Scholarly Communications Librarian at California State University, East Bay. Lana is a founding advisory board member of Pioneers for H.O.P.E, which is a cross-campus group that addresses basic needs. Darice Ingram is the Pioneers for Hope H.O.P.E coordinator at California State University, East Bay. And without further delay, I will hand it over to our panelists.
Thank you, Sam, and welcome everybody. Darice and I are really excited to be talking with you all about a topic near and dear to our hearts, and particularly because we believe that libraries and library workers have a really important role to play in basic needs services in our campus, on our campuses, and in our communities. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. We want to begin with a land acknowledgement, and Darice and I wish to acknowledge that we live and work on unceded Ohlone and Bay Miwok territory. As guests on this land, we give thanks to the Ohlone and Miwok peoples, past, present, and future, for their centuries of stewardship and continued resilience in the face of settler colonialism, genocide, and white supremacy. For those of you who also live or work on Ohlone territory, we want to highlight the organization ACRL, which is an urban, Indigenous, women-led land trust that facilitates the return of Indigenous land to Indigenous people. And these slides, which you'll be receiving, have a link to visit ACRL's website, where you can also pay a voluntary Shumai land tax, which helps ACRL with the work of rematriation, returning Indigenous land to Indigenous people, establishing a cemetery to reinter stolen Ohlone ancestral remains, and building urban gardens, community centers, and ceremonial spaces here in the East Bay. All right, so today Darice and I will be walking you through the what basic needs services are, especially in light of basic needs services for college students. We'll be talking about how this relates to equity. Darice will be telling us more about Pioneers for Hope and the services that we have here to address student basic needs insecurities at Cal State East Bay. And then we'll be talking about why and how academic libraries and library workers should be involved in basic needs work. And as Sam mentioned, we'll be doing our questions and answers at the end, and a reminder that we are using progressive stacking. So if you are a BIPOC participant, please put an asterisk before your question so we can prioritize those once we get to the Q&A function. All right, so Darice and I would like to get a better understanding of folks' familiarity and involvement with basic needs work. So we have 2 polls to do just that. Elois, if you could run the first poll, please. All right, so let us know, what's your current understanding of basic needs? Okay, so it looks like the majority of participants are somewhat familiar for it. Some folks who it's a new concept for you, or you've heard of it but know what it is. So we really appreciate that you're here to learn about this service. So this might be a little redundant then, but we also wanted to know if any folks in the room are currently involved in basic needs efforts on campus. So Elois, if you could run our second poll, please. Okay, so it looks like about a third of you are involved and 2/3 of you who responded are not involved. So thank you so much for giving us a better sense of our audience today. All right, you can take it over, Darice.
Well, a little bit about our basic needs. And when we speak about basic needs, we're looking at financial wellness, food, housing, hygiene, mental health, and transportation. So Pioneers for Hope, which stands for Helping Our Pioneers Excel, looks at a holistic approach for all students' basic needs. And when we look at basic needs from the UC standpoint, it's really looking at how students not meeting their basic needs are being impacted in their progression through college and to career. And so we take a holistic approach of what and how we support students and partner with multiple departments on campus, including our libraries. Our library partnership is incredibly important to us. And what we found as we started working with our libraries are a central point where a lot of students are connecting. It's also a place where marginalized students may have not felt comfortable in the past. So by connecting and partnering with our basic needs program in our libraries, we've been able to connect students with both research and academic support, along with meeting basic needs, which in turn helps them connect better to the community of the university and progress more purposely through the university. Next slide.
All right, so we want to zoom in on food insecurity and housing insecurity from those 6 basic needs categories that we talked about, as these are the 2 that often universities begin with in addressing, especially around food insecurity. So food insecurity is measured by the US, or defined by the USDA on a scale that ranges from high food security to very low food security. And then food insecurity itself kind of falls into the lower two categories of this scale and is defined by the USDA as limited or uncertain access to nutritionally adequate and safe foods, or the ability to acquire acceptable foods in socially acceptable ways due to limited financial resources. And I think when we think about food insecurity in college students, that stereotype of, the starving college student who survives on ramen and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches comes to mind, but that stereotype really masks the very serious and pervasive and long-standing problem of college food insecurities on each and every one of our campuses. So food insecurity for college students can look a little bit different than in the general population. And I really like this, this quote from Harmony Ripond, who studies food insecurity. And she talks about for college students, it could mean running out of food between paychecks, attending campus events in search of food, reducing food intake, purchasing minimally nutritious food that costs less, skipping meals, and deciding between paying for textbooks or food, right? So something that we hear coming up in the open educational movement as well in our libraries. And this rate is from a study from the United States Government Accountability Office, and they did a systematic review of food insecurity studies on college campuses and found that for the majority of the studies, the rate of food insecurity for college students was 30% or higher in the majority of published studies. And we know at Cal State East Bay that this number is at least 50% of our student body who are facing food insecurity as students here at Cal State East Bay. And as we'll talk about, we also know that across the country that food insecurity has dramatically risen as a result of the COVID pandemic, with food banks servicing populations who are now being called the newly hungry, who are folks who have never accessed food aid before and need to do so now because of the huge financial impact that the COVID pandemic has had for them and their families.
And just to add on to that, this was pre-COVID. And if you saw the comment that many students attended events in search of food. So many campuses have gone totally online, and that portion of food is no longer available to most of our students that are facing food insecurity. And the other portion that we look at is housing insecurity. So when we look at housing insecurity, our definition of it is a lack of fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, which includes sharing the housing of others or couch surfing, living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, camping grounds, emergency transitional shelters, public or private places that are not designed for humans to live, i.e. classrooms and things of that nature, living in cars, parks, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar setting. And that's from the McKinney-Vento setting, study of 1987. But we do know that many college students are actually considered couch surfers. They're very good at finding a place to stay, and sometimes maybe couch surfing with friends who may not even realize that they're couch surfing. So they may be on Tuesday at one friend's couch, Thursday another friend's couch, or what we've seen at Cal State East Bay, the students who shows up early for everything and maybe staying late and has traditionally been viewed as a student that's all in. They may be facing food insecurity and housing insecurity. And at East Bay, one of our students actually helped break the mold. And that student was actually sleeping in a classroom, very active in leadership on campus. Part of our associated students was sleeping in classrooms, first to work, last to leave, just thought of a very active and engaged student and decided to tell their story. And we got a lot more insight of where our students were actually sleeping on our campus. So we also found that 46% of students in the United States are housing insecure. And as Lana mentioned about, we believe that that actually number is higher. So this study was done before COVID hit. So one thing that we're looking at right now is also supporting students who are newly unhoused. We don't tend to say homeless, we just say insecurely housed or unhoused. And so we know that that number is fairly high, and many universities may not have actively looked at that, but this is what your students are actually addressing that are visiting your libraries or coming to you for support.
And it's a newer field looking at how basic needs insecurities affects college students. It's definitely a research field that's exploding right now, but there is a clear link between basic needs insecurities and the dramatic effects that it has on college students. So food and housing insecurity is negatively correlated with academic performance, class attendance, and concentration in class, right? So if you're hungry, if you're stressed about where you're going to sleep, it's difficult to be able to, reliably attend class and concentrate. We know that consistent hunger can cause students to drop out at a higher rate or take on additional loans to cover the cost of food and other basic necessities. And I also think about those students who drop out who don't attain their degree from college and still have all of that debt from attending, right? So it puts you in a really vicious cycle. We also know that the stress caused by food and housing insecurities negatively affects students' mental and physical health, leading to long-term health consequences such as depression, hopelessness, isolation, and embarrassment. Not surprisingly, there's a disproportionate burden of basic needs insecurities, and research and experience has made this very clear that, for instance, with racial and ethnic disparities, white students have lower rates of food insecurity as compared to most of their peers. And the highest rates of food insecurity we see are among Latinx populations, Black populations, and Indigenous students are much higher than their white peers. For housing insecurity, we see that American Indian, Alaskan Native, and other Indigenous students have the highest rates of homelessness, followed by Pacific Islander or Native Hawaiian students. And housing insecurity tends to be much lower for white students. We also know that basic needs insecurities are experienced at higher rates by other traditionally underrepresented groups in higher ed, such as first-gen college students, of which we have the majority of our students at Cal State East Bay are first-gen college students, people with disabilities, trans and non-binary folks, former foster youth, and single parents. And while basic needs insecurities are very likely present at each and every college and university, the rates are higher for those attending community college and public universities. And when we're thinking about, well, why are these rates so high for college students, particularly at community colleges and public universities? This rise is linked to a consistent decrease in public funding for higher education, which has caused tuition rates to steeply increase, and causing more students to take out loans and incur debt to be able to afford their college education.
And we know with the COVID pandemic, the disparities have been increased and they're much, much worse. I don't think that we have specific research at this point on the long range and long reaching impacts, but an initial scan here at Cal State East Bay, we're finding many of our students are now increasingly much more likely to be food insecure and housing insecure. And that's affecting the populations that Lana mentioned before, but it's also affecting our international students in a way that's not often thought about. So international students who are in the country may or may not be able to go back home, tend to have less support or access to support from parents or supportive services, or countries may have actually shut down. International students federally also have pretty strict guidelines about work and often cannot or are not able to work any place except if they're on campus. And so we're realizing, and then also don't have necessary access to social services programs that are traditionally able and available to our students who are domestic or citizens or legal permanent residents. So we're going to talk about a little bit about that, how we've partnered here on campus, how we're connecting with our libraries and continually supporting our students and being nimble in how we're supporting students with the ever-changing landscape that we have due to the pandemic. So I'll talk a little bit about the Pioneers for Hope, our pantry and our services. And this is just something I use for our background, just to remind us about the services that we offer, how we are connecting with our campus services, such as our library, and why that's such an important and integral connection on not only our campuses, but campuses across the country. So a little bit about Pioneers for Hope. We're dedicated to addressing student basic needs and to allow them to focus on academic success. And that looks different for different students. So we're connecting pretty heavily with both academic affairs, our student affairs departments, and across campuses, including UPD, housing, multiple different resources on campus. We operate an emergency intervention fund, which is literally cash assistance for students or emergency assistance for students who are dealing with emergency financial resources. We operate an on-site shelter of 8 beds and identify resources for temporary housing for our students. And we have 3 on-campus food pantries, one of them in our libraries and how we support students. And then we also support with CalFresh, which is the supplemental nutrition application program, which is federal funded, used to be called food stamps. We call it CalFresh here, to help support students getting access to food, as well as running a donor supported clothing closet. Now I need to step back a little bit. This is not how we started. We started with simple snacks on a desk in an office. And that is how we started. And many times when we're talking, we want to just remind everyone, it doesn't have to be a big start. It just has to be a start to connect with students and help support them and their needs. We started back in the end of 2015, the beginning of 2016, and we had no idea what we were doing. We had a big dream and a lot of people who were very interested in connecting with the program. And my microphone went on mute, so I'm not sure, Lana, where that's cut off. So we started very, very small. It was just a few people who were very interested in doing this work. And right after that, our chancellor's office came out with a study that really showed what a big food security need that we had across all 23 campuses. We received presidential support. So our president at the time, President Mariko, became a huge champion of the program. And that really helped support us in launching across campus. And we allowed everyone to come to the table to talk about not necessarily how we're going to solve the issue, because if we could solve hunger, we'd all be Nobel Peace Prize winners, right? So our job was not to solve hunger, but just to support the students where they were in order to connect, to help them progress through college. And that is how the partnership came up with our library. Was it easy initially? No, there were bumps in the road. You know, our librarians, the way in where we meet, our librarians, there was a certain way that they did things, that our library did things, and there was a partnership that came up, and we started connecting with the library because we had people on our basic needs task force at the time, which became a board that morphed into a board. And then when we started to do this work, we had plenty of bumps in the road. Like, hey, you're here, we're loud, we're in the library. Libraries are not normally loud, but students that were coming to us felt very, very comfortable and were very loud. So we had to walk through that process and talk with our libraries and our librarians and make it a partnership. So I just say that as a little background, that this is not scientific necessarily. We have the research to back the work that we're doing, but it's if everyone comes to the table with how will we support students, and connecting marginalized students to libraries is something that became an outcome of the work that we're doing. So it wasn't something that we initially looked at, but students who had free and reduced lunch coming out of high school, who had connected with food pantries, who may not have had a lot of experience either going to the libraries or hadn't had a great experience or understood how to use the libraries, or not people that were coming to the libraries. And so we wanted to connect our students there, and we became a hub inside of the library where we cross-promoted the services that each one of our departments had. So when we look at how we provide basic needs, and this is a wellness approach that comes from one of our pantries in New York, we look at overall pantry wellness. So we look at basic needs. Our campus strategic plan is really looking at how are students connecting socially and emotionally and intellectually. What is their spiritual connection? We have a lot of connection with our counseling office. What is their environment? What environment are they coming from? What does our physical environment look like? You'll see that my background is very bright. Our space is very bright. We celebrate inclusiveness and that the space belongs to everyone. We don't say, oh, go visit the pantry because you have a need. We tend to say, hey, stop by and visit the pantry. If you know someone that's hungry, come and if you know someone that's hungry, or you may know someone that could be hungry, but at least come by and see what snacks that we have. We do a lot of recipe sharing. We do a lot of promotion on our social media sites, on Instagram, on Facebook. Our students own the space. They own the space in our library. They own the space in our physical pantries. We want to make it bright. We tend to put pictures up of our students in the spaces. And then when we do online and virtual, the background that you see is one that we use in our virtual office. We have another one that says welcome, so that when a student pops into our virtual office space, they feel welcome, they feel engaged. We use a trauma-informed approach to connecting with students. So being mindful of past traumas that students or anyone, so our pantry is actually open to faculty and staff as well, or anyone that may visit the pantry can use. So it's always a welcoming space meant to be that. We play music, we have funds, we have programming, and we partner with our library to do some of those things. We do, when we are open in a physical space, we actually do donation collection in the library. We provide resources. We tell our students that are stopping by the pantry, how is their homework going? How is their research going? Did they know that there's a research librarian dedicated to the work that they're doing? And have they connected to, we use terms like, have you connected with my friend Lana, who's very friendly, it can help with research. So we use that terminology and resource sharing, and then also providing resource lists and regular lists, and always using the mind frame that this is not a detrimental, like you're not coming into a space where you have a huge need, but we're a family-friendly campus, we're a connected campus. So what we like to do is have you take a look at it, come on down, do a tour. If you do a tour and you find out maybe one of your friends or someone you know, or if you could become we call them CalFresh ambassador or a H.O.P.E ambassador. So now that you come and visit it, you are now a H.O.P.E ambassador or ambassador of hope. Why don't you help us spread the good news that, hey, we got cool snacks down here if somebody wants to stop by and grab some snacks. Because your students that are food insecure and housing insecure don't show up as the media portrays them. Ruffled, they may be tired, but they don't necessarily show as having food insecurity. Many students try to hide that on a very, very, very big basis. They try to hide it as much as possible so that a professor doesn't know. So we encourage our professors to mention it. And we have some videos now that we'll be sharing about CalFresh in the classroom, but a student doesn't necessarily come to the professor or come to the library and say, I'm hungry. You may be working with one of your students and they say, you know what, oh, I haven't had anything to eat today. So having snacks out on a regular basis, when we're on campus, we actually have about 15 baskets of snacks that we place in multiple areas around the campus. And they just say free snacks. Grab one, and then it has some information about our food pantry, our meal swipes, our clothing closets, and our emergency assistance.
Yeah, what Darice is talking about too reminds me that our Associated Students Incorporated have currently been working with the Academic Senate to get a basic needs statement required on all syllabi on campus. Because we know that a lot of times students' first point of contact for learning about these services is through their professors. So that can just be such a helpful connection to make, is, you know, mentioning that these services are available when you're when you're teaching or when you're interacting with students, or having, the information discreetly around, like how Darice was mentioning with the snack baskets, is so valuable to getting students, in need, who know about the services. All right, so now we're going to transition towards our pitch to you all in academic libraries and as library workers. So academic libraries cannot truly address student equity if we do not address college students' basic needs. So while we know that it's important work to do, in regards to things like diversifying our collections, doing work to eliminate fines, employing culturally competent teaching strategies, we also know that for our students with basic needs insecurity, who are disproportionately from traditionally underrepresented and marginalized groups in higher education, that sort of work is not enough if they're dropping out because their basic needs are not being met. So libraries must work with their campuses to incorporate this basic needs work into the very foundation of the school if we are truly going to address equity work on campus. And I think that our work and expertise as library and information workers positions us to be leaders in basic needs insecurities work on our campus. For instance, we are experts at navigating information, resources, and systems. And for any of you who have tried to fill out forms through the government before, you know that these skills come in handy because it is not a straightforward path. So basic needs services come from a variety of different agencies, and it's important to be able to compile and decode complex processes and enrollment procedures. So I'm thinking specifically, about in California, our supplemental nutrition are formerly known as food stamps, is called CalFresh, and that application and that process is complicated, particularly for college students to know if they are even eligible to sign up for it. So, having those services that can help students not only hear about that they may be eligible for it, but actually help them with the enrollment process is huge. As library and information workers, we have extensive experience with campus collaboration. We are already working with faculty, staff, and students. And a successful basic needs effort on campus requires all of those different groups being there to foster and support a holistic campus-wide approach to basic needs services. And we constantly, think of the library as the heart of the campus, right? It's our meeting place. It's where students come to get help, talk with their friends, get access to technology. So why not leverage this centrality in the campus life to help connect students with basic needs services? The library pantry that we have on our campus serves primarily as the after hours food pantry because the library is open, latest. It's open on the weekends, it's open in the evenings, and having that availability to students beyond, like a 9 to 5 type hours is so important. And then I think about the work that we do that's so relevant to just the distribution side of things is that we've long been in the business of distributing materials, right? That's been our bread and butter for quite some time. And we continually find innovative and effective ways to do so. I'm thinking about all the changes that we're seeing, with curbside pickup and different services that we've innovated to get our materials out to users during this pandemic. We also have long been privacy experts and champions, and those skills come in handy when we think about basic needs services because part of, different campuses take different approaches, and being able to be aware of how to maintain privacy for basic needs services, which can be stigmatizing, is so important to be able to thinking about how to structure, the delivery of food or just connecting with folks to get them hooked up with the basic needs services. And then finally, libraries and library workers were skilled with outreach and programming about getting the word out, communicating and connecting with our users.
And I just want to add the research piece. So as a programmatic expert here in we're so busy doing the program that we have to have partnerships to help us with the research when we're talking with our donors, when we're talking with our grantors, when we're talking with our campus. The library already has established relationships with faculty, with campus partners. And so that has been extremely, extremely important for us as we've expanded the work that we're doing. At East Bay, we're getting we're building a new library. And part of that work, Lana made sure that we were all connected as we start looking at the programming going forward in this new realm. And so that has been extremely important for us in the work that we do, to also make sure that there is a historical perspective and information around the work that we do, along with planning for sustainability and for growth, and to meeting the needs of the changing environment that we have for our students, faculty, and staff.
Okay, so now we are going to open up, before we open up to Q&A, we are using a system for peer reviewing your questions prior to asking them that was put forward by Dr. Eve Tuck, who is an associate professor at the University of Toronto. So we ask before you send in your question to consider, is it really a question? Does your question imply you should be giving the talk? Does your question need to be posed in front of everyone, or is it a question that should be asked privately? And our contact information will be available on these slides as well. And is your question asking the speakers to do work that you should do on your own? So we're going to go ahead and transition to the Q&A part of this. And as a reminder, we are using progressive stacking to give priority to BIPOC attendees. So if you identify as BIPOC, please include an asterisk before your question so we can prioritize those.
And thank you to our presenters. We have had a few questions come in during the presentation. Do you want to go ahead and start answering some of those that have already been submitted while folks are maybe gathering follow-up thoughts to submit to?
Sure. Should I stop sharing my screen so I can see that, Doc, or are you going to read them to us?
I can read them out to you if you'd like. And like I said, ones that have been marked with an asterisk, I'll start with those as they come in, and then we'll go back down the list within there.
Okay, that sounds great.
Excellent. So our first question that came in after the stacking is, are students permitted to opt out of a meal plan when they live on campus? I'm wondering if food insecurity impacts on-campus students as well.
Lana, I'll take that one. So when our students are not permitted to opt out of a meal plan. So every student that lives on campus is mandated to have a meal plan, and that is to help with food insecurity. But the other part of that is students can choose the meal plan that they want. So the meal plan that they choose, many of them choose the cheapest meal plan after they have that option once they're not a freshman any longer. And what we found is, even with the meal plan, many of our students still qualify for our CalFresh program. So a meal plan, and looking at that, and that's been a learning process for us. And even as we've connected with students that are coming to the food pantry, a student may have to work. And if they're working and they're working off campus, even if they're on campus student, I would say 85% of our students actually need to work. If they're working off campus, they may not have access. The pantry is open and it's open later, but they may not have access to the dining commons during the hours that it's open. Most of our students still qualify for CalFresh, and a lot of our students still come to the pantry, even if they have a meal plan. So that is a question that we ask when our students actually come to the pantry on campus. We ask, do you live on campus? And that helped us when we started that about 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, just to understand where our population is coming from. So.
Yeah, I just want to add to that too, that on our slide, you'll see that we've included some other resources, and there is an amazing group that is student-led called Swipe Out of Hunger that we use here, which is where Students who have meal plans, who have extra swipes they're not going to use, can donate those swipes to Pioneers for Hope. And then Darice and her team then are able to distribute those to students in need who can then access the dining commons on campus to get food using those swipes.
Great, thank you for that. Our next question, I'll just kind of take them as they came in there. What kind of space did you use for the pantry, or specifically, what was the space used for prior to becoming a pantry?
So before we came a pantry, we had a desk with some drawers and some snacks on top of it, a bureau that we grew. We put some shelves on that desk, and then that grew, and then we got space is a commodity on every university campus. So, and then we had our student health center actually gave us a portion of one of their labs. And that's actually where we were operating out of on one of the campuses. And we turned that space, it's not very big at all. We turned that space into a pantry. In our branch campus, we actually turned a supply closet into a pantry. And then in the library, we actually had a donor that donated a cart. The cart that you saw with the students earlier is a cart that was donated by a donor. It wasn't very expensive, but you can use any cart, just a few $100s and put that in the library. And we connected, and we initially staffed it, and still do, with student volunteers. We have been able to now start paying some students or working with our work study students to help staff that support after hours. So it provides student support. We provide snacks and information and help students apply for CalFresh and also connect to our library. So not a lot of space. And we still don't have a lot of space.
Great information there. And so next question was, how have you worked around food policies on campus, if you have run into that at all?
Lana, do you want to start with some of the history on that one?
I guess when you're talking about food policies, I'm not sure if you're talking about like being able to eat on campus or what relates to that, but I can talk about that maybe about a year into launching Pioneers for Hope, our campus was beginning negotiations for a new food vendor on campus who, does the dining hall, but also runs all of the eateries on campus. And our campus, like probably a lot of yours, is up on a hill. It's very isolated from the surrounding community. When students go there, they're pretty much stuck on campus, and there aren't a lot of places to get food. So, unless they're bringing their own food, which then that has its own issues of we don't have a lot of like refrigerators or microwaves for students to be able to, heat up or safely store their food. So when we were in negotiations with our now new food vendor, part of that negotiations included language around, making meal swipes available for basic needs and securities, the terms about how like collecting meal swipes, unused meal swipes from other students. So that was part of our contractual negotiations with our new vendor. And really, I think something that every campus should be considering when, they're coming up for negotiations with these big food providers. And then in terms of policies, you may be referring to like library food policies. So we already allowed eating and drinking in the library on our campus. And most of the library, except for the quiet study areas. So that wasn't an issue with being able to offer free food in the library itself.
And I want to highlight the resource with Swipe Out Hunger. If you're looking at doing contracts, they've done some white papers, and they have some pretty strong partnerships with Sodexo and other large food providers on campus. So that information is available in the resource guide.
Great. Next question is, we've currently been hearing and reading about some negative associations with the word wellness, especially in relation to those with disabilities and chronic illness. Have you experienced any of this?
I would say that I have not. There is definitely sometimes some pushback around basic needs. And does basic needs belong on a college campus? Is that a social services support? And we often respond that we're about student success and student support. So that is our response to it. Or from the wellness standpoint, I have not personally heard that, and I don't know if Lana has.
I haven't encountered that pushback on our campus either about wellness. And I'm thinking about, like, we have a few campus services like student health and counseling, and our recreation and wellness center, which is about which is like our gym and other services that now Pioneers for Hope falls under. But we haven't received that feedback about it being connected to ableism yet, but definitely something to note for the future.
And the next question is kind of a follow-up or a more specific take. How do students feel about the term food insecure? Are there other terms that have been used?
From my standpoint, many students don't recognize that term. That's very much a term that we talk about. Students are aware if they're hungry, and we make it very light. Our goal is to combat both myths and stigmatization. And so we just talk about, have you ever been hungry? Which says everybody, right? If you're ever hungry, we have support services on campus that if you're hungry, you want a snack, stop by. So it's not like, hey, you have to fill out a contract to come back and visit us. We don't do a long assessment. And we actually started out that way. We did talk about every person that comes in, we should do an assessment, but that became a barrier. So it's more like, hey, if you're hungry, stop by, bring a friend, let's talk about that. And then in those conversations, when a student gets there, we share a lot of the other resources, including our libraries and our student health and counseling services.
Yeah, I want to add a couple things to that, where like a genius framing that Darice and her team came up with is to refer to this as food aid, right? Because as students, you're already familiar with the concept of financial aid. And so instead of talking about CalFresh or talking about SNAP or talking about food stamps, they've reframed this as, hey, are you eligible for financial aid? Then you're probably eligible for food aid. And to try to use that that framing that's very like college student focused in figuring that out, particularly because, it was only like about a month ago, I think, Darice, where there've been some legislative movement here in California that's helped to clarify which college students are eligible to receive CalFresh. And so now we know that it's any student who has a zero estimated family contribution or who are eligible for work study can now are eligible for CalFresh. So I think being able to message it in a way that doesn't lean in on the service itself, but is like a concept that's familiar to students has helped. And I also wanted to add too, so I work with some other faculty members in Darice on a few food insecurity research studies. And we recently did one where we were looking at food aid preferences for people who on that USDA scale that I mentioned are seen as marginally food insecure. And so that's people who, maybe skip a meal every now and again, but by and large have to choose items that are, not nutritious or not what they would choose. But it was interesting because in the interviews that we did, these students who did fill out that inventory and, based on their answers, did match the definition for marginal food insecurity, then when we went to talk about it, did not see themselves as people who had food struggles, did not want to identify as such. And it's, I think, really points to that stigmatization of hunger and how prevalent that is, where it's very much, a hidden a hidden struggle that a lot of our students are going through, and it can be really embarrassing to talk about.
And with faculty and staff as well. So we haven't talked about that a lot, but especially with the pandemic, we've really started promoting that, hey, we have food in food bags available and fresh food. Save some money on some groceries, or you may have a neighbor that could use some support. So stop on by. So we really make it a very casual, we're a very big helping campus. And so one thing that we faced is that many people feel like they may be taking it away from someone else, or have expressed that to us. So we've done a lot to combat that. Like, instead of thinking you're taking it away, you could be using this to help someone in your own community, in your own dorm, in your own household, now that you're back at home. And then you can use those dollars for something else, repurposing those dollars, by and large, helping both the California community and economic standpoint, as well as family, friends, or neighbors.
Great. So the next question kind of goes back to the beginning. Did the library initiate the partnership, or was it initiated elsewhere?
I think it was an accident. No.
I can speak to that, actually. So prior to Darice being the H.O.P.E coordinator, there was someone else who had that job and then was also seeing students. It was way too much for one person. And they pulled together a bunch of representatives from across the campus to be part of this advisory board for Pioneers for Hope. I don't even think we had a name yet. It was basically Student Basic Needs Services. And when the call went out, there wasn't a call for a library representative, but there was a call for a faculty representative. And in the CSU system, librarians are faculty. So I responded to that email like in 1 second. I was like, I want it to be me. How is this me? Because you know, a lot of my research was already around food insecurity, and this was like a passionate topic for me. So I joined the Basic Needs Advisory Board as the faculty representative, and then became the library representative when one of my research collaborators from Health Sciences came on as the faculty representative. And, you know, I remember really early on, it was that conversation of this food is in a closet in our student health and counseling center, you know, or it's being moved around. We have no permanent home. Can it live in the library? And, you know, the library is also stretched for space. So we didn't have like a dedicated room that could become this pantry. But, you know, myself, Alex, who was in Darice's position previously, and Andrea, who oversaw student health and counseling services, we started conversations with the dean of the university libraries, who, you know, quickly recognized the role that our library on campus could play in this, and that, you know, we could have, though we couldn't house the full pantry, we could house this after hours kiosk. There was already a space that I think was kind of just like a dead zone that had like a refillable payment machine on the wall, and that was about it. So yeah, it was through conversations with the library dean, who really was supportive about this service from early on, to be able to allocate that space in the library. So I think, you know, it definitely helps that on our campus, the president of the university and his partner were big supporters of basic needs services. So we knew that we had buy-in from the very top of our campus, including even like the chancellor, who oversees all the CSUs. But then getting that buy-in from our library dean was key for, you know, making sure that there was a space in the library. And as Darice talked about too, that there was the commitment to be able to work through those interpersonal issues that arose when the kiosk did open in the library. So I think that that's very important to get buy-in from leadership.
And a donor actually donated the kiosk. So we, that was the other thing, working with our foundation and departments. And so the donor actually donated the kiosk so that it didn't have a cost associated that was coming directly from the campus.
Yeah, and I will say too that, over the 5 years or so that we've been working on Pioneers for Hope, that it has been a very popular and tangible way for people in the community to donate to the university. So, like the library kiosk was a set amount that someone who had seen a news story, I believe is how it came about a student who was living in their car and the services that they got through Pioneers for Hope, where we were getting calls from different groups who wanted to donate towards this important work. So like I think that it continues to be something that is very tangible for donors to contribute to the university, and that can have varying ranges from, the cost of that kiosk up to more expensive, like permanent funding streams for this program.
And we've got a couple that I think I can maybe combine into one that kind of deal with the nuts and bolts, the technicalities. So who stocks and takes care of the inventory? How much time is involved? What types of foods are you making available? And is there a limit to how many items students can take?
So for our nuts and bolts, so we actually partner with our 2 food banks. So we're located in 2 different counties. So we partner with the food bank to stock and get our food. We work with students to stock the pantry. We do have, when we first started, Lana mentioned Alex. Alex was like part-time here, part-time supporting students. And since then, my position is now full-time. We have full-time admin support as well now, and that has morphed. But students help us stock and staff the pantry. They actually pretty much run it. And we were doing volunteers initially, and now we're able to pay students with different funding streams. And that's very important. And we tend to have students that work with us that have either experienced food insecurity or who stand up like Lana did and say, hey, I'm really passionate about this. Can I come and support? So we stock every week for the most part. And then we provide inventory that same way. And so it's a great leadership opportunity for students. And we have students across campus from analytics who are looking at how we're doing running our programs, to our public administration, to our MSW, to our pre-dental students. So it's a big chasm of students that are working with us to help stock and run the nuts and bolts. And then we partner with them and with our library. And we have staff members who come and volunteer, faculty who ask to come and volunteer. And it's a way to really stay connected to the community in a very meaningful way that doesn't have to take a lot of time.
I just want to add too that we partner with our Alameda County Community Food Bank. So that's where the majority of our food comes from. And you can look for your community food banks in your areas. They're able to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables and other coffee, bread, all kinds of different food. And we're able to either get it on campus as a partner for free or for very, very low cost. So, it is not the same cost as running to the grocery store and buying, a giant carton of granola bars. We're able to make the food available at an affordable price to us.
And we have multiple partnerships. Cliff Bars, which
Mhm.
is located all across the country, is more than willing to donate multiple cases of Cliff Bars. And the food pantry partnership is amazing. And we are very conscious and require that we have fresh food available for our students. So we always have fresh produce and fruits and vegetables available for all of our students, staff, and faculty.
And I'll just say there are a few more questions that were posed that we don't have time to get to, but we will get those to the speakers so that they might be able to address those in some follow-up to this webinar here. So if you asked a question and didn't get it answered there, be on the lookout for those follow-ups to get that information addressed there.
Yes, and you will be getting a link to the slides and the evaluation again. Sorry, I've had to drop it into the chat so much. But thank you all for coming. And thank you for all of our panelists for sharing your expertise with us today. I'd also like to thank Elois Sharp from ACRL. Remember to fill out that assessment form. Again, that's one of my jobs, is to keep pushing that. Thank you all for coming. Are there any final comments from the presenters before we head out?
Just that our contact information is in the slides. Please reach out to us. You'll also see links to our Instagram accounts and some other resources that we think are crucial for better understanding and addressing college student food insecurity and housing insecurity as well.
And I would say go for it. Go for it. Go for the partnership. It's so meaningful and incredible. Just to see students' faces and the support that you are able to provide as library experts.
Yes, y'all are getting a lot of praise in the chat, a lot of thank yous, also a lot of acknowledgement of how inspirational this was, and it was great. So thank you all for coming. I want to be cautious of ACRL holding the Zoom room for them. And again, remember, look out in the email for the email follow-up with these slides and the recording. And thank you so much to Lana and Darice and Andrea and Elois. Thank you.